3 of my alocasias are on life support right now. After 5 years of growing alocasias, I'm still losing plants. 5 years of buying them, losing them, swearing I was done, and then going back for more. And in that time, I've learned the hard-won, sometimes embarrassing truths you won't find in standard general alocasia care guides. Black velvet? Gone. Red secret? Gone. More than once. Scalprum variegated? Gone. Mellow? Gone. Came back again? Gone again. Friedic variegated? On life support currently. Nebula? On life support. And my flying squid? Nearly gone. 5 years of this, and here's what I know now. 7 lessons. Some of them I learned the hard way, and those 3 plants in rehab, I'll come back to them at the end and tell you what happened. Let's get into it. Dual alocasias and the season problem. If you're in Melbourne or anywhere with proper seasons, dual alocasias will test you every single winter. 1 or 2 winters in, if you haven't upped the humidity, light and temperature, you'll most likely lose them to dormancy. And dormancy sounds manageable until you've lived through it 4 or 5 times and realize that some of those plants just aren't coming back. Years ago, I was obsessed with dual alocasias. I had the black velvet, the scalprum, the mellow, the azlani. I think I even called the silver dragon's leaf sexy on camera. I was that far gone. And the thing is, back then they were doing well. That's what makes it so cruel. They weren't struggling, they weren't giving me any warning signs, and then winter hit. I moved house and they dropped like flies. I do still have a black velvet and a scalprum. I got new ones, and that's actually a perfectly valid approach. Sometimes the right answer is just to start fresh. Right now, my philosophy has changed. I no longer expect dual alocasias like these ones to be forever plant. So unless I provide major artificial support, I don't expect them to hang around forever. Instead, I treat them like a 2 to 3 year relationship. I enjoy them while they're gorgeous, and I expect them to struggle in the winter, and then I realize that starting fresh with a new one is a completely valid choice. Now the mellow, that's a slightly different story. The way this specific plant keeps resurrecting itself is one of the most useful things I've ever learned, but we'll get to that in lesson 6. Why I stopped using the submerged method for most of my alocasias. When I started growing alocasias in Leca, the submerged method was my default. The inner pot sits directly in the nutrient solution. Simple, easy, I liked it. And then I started noticing a pattern. The softer leaved varieties, the green velvet, the Friedic variegated, anything with thinner, more delicate leaves were far more susceptible to root rot than the harder leaved ones like the mellow. And almost all of those softer leaved plants were in submerged setups. This kind of arrangement over here. The constant direct contact between the roots and the reservoir, I think, was just too much for them. Alocasias go from fine to dead very quickly once root rot sets in. So I started moving the more sensitive ones to a wick setup. The inner pot sits above the reservoir. The wick draws moisture up gradually. The roots get what they need without sitting directly in the solution. The root zone stays airy and moist rather than wet. And the difference was massive. There was far less root rot in the plants once I made that switch. There are exceptions. My Alocasia ebony has been submerged for 5 years and is still alive. My Adora batik, this plant over here, and my Regal Shield, the one I just showed you, my Regal Shield Albo. The roots, look at that. It's in a submerged setup. Although, looking at these roots, I'm a little bit tempted to actually move this one to a wick setup because they're looking a bit sus. So I don't know. I'm now starting to think that harder leaved alocasias like this Alocasia mellow probably might be more robust and they might be more tolerant of the submerged method than the softer leaved ones like the variegated Friedics. The submerged method isn't wrong. It's just selective. The softer and more sensitive the variety, the more I'd lean towards a wick. And realizing this is what brought me to something that took me an even longer time to figure out. Even when I had the right setup, some of my Alocasias were still crashing after I moved them into Leca. And it turned out that the problem wasn't what was happening after the transition, it was the transition itself.
The way you transition your alocasia changes everything.
This is probably the lesson I feel the most strongly about because every time I test it, the conclusion is exactly the same. Alocasias absolutely hate root disturbance, and the way you handle the roots during a transition directly affects how the plant performs for months afterward. The standard advice on the internet for transitioning an alocasia from soil to leca is almost always wash all the soil off, scrub the roots for those of you into scrubbing roots, trim the damage and pot the plant up. While that does work, it almost always results in leaf loss or damage for that particular alocasia plant. The plant will drop its leaves and spends months rebuilding from scratch. So a few months ago, I tried a no-wash method with 2 Alocasia maharanis, these 2 plants right here. I just tipped them out of their pots, gave them a few light shakes to remove loose dirt, and potted them directly into leca with the remaining soil still attached. The key was keeping a very shallow reservoir and doing intensive weekly flushes so that some of the leftover soil gradually washed away over time. 2 months later, both plants had kept all of their original leaves. Both had new growth coming through. There was no crash, no regression. That was probably the most encouraging result I'd had in probably 5 years of growing Alocasias. In my experience, harder-leaved Alocasias tend to tolerate transitions better regardless of the method you use. It's the softer-leaved ones that really punish you for getting it wrong. So one might think that, well, this plant was probably going to survive anyway because a Maharani has a thicker leaf, but that's probably another experiment in the making. If you need proof of just how sensitive these roots are, look at what happens when you handle them even a fraction too much. These are 2 of my nebulas, same species, repotted in the exact same session just recently. The first one is the one living in the moss leca glass vase, and the second one was in the pond leca pot. The pond leca plant was actually looking a bit better than the moss leca one, but when repotting it, I handled those roots more. I didn't disturb the roots of the moss leca plant. It's completely fine and thriving, but the pond leca plant, because of that extra handling, is now sitting in a nutrient solution with an air stone literally fighting to recover. Same plant, same day, completely different outcome based entirely on how much I disturbed the roots. I'll show you this one at the end and talk about it in greater detail. But for now, the lesson is absolute. When it comes to Alocasias, the less you touch the roots, the better. Every single time I ignore that rule, I pay for it. The moss and leca method works, but here's what they don't tell you. There's been a lot of content going around about growing Alocasias in glass vases with a leca at the bottom and a sphagnum moss around the roots. It looks incredible. And yes, I was skeptical at first, but I didn't want to dismiss it without trying it. So I ran an experiment using my Alocasia nebula and my flying squid. 2 plants went into the glass vase and moss setup. 2 went into a ventilated plastic pot with leca and a mineral substrate similar to pon. Same light, same nutrients, same growth end. I tracked them for several months. Here's what I found. The moss and leca method does work. The roots looked excellent, the plants grew. I was genuinely impressed. But here's the other side of that. First, the algae is a persistent nightmare. Glass plus moisture plus light plus nutrients equals a green mess every time. Second, the fungus gnats. One of the main reasons I moved to semi-hydro was to get away from soil-loving pests, and the moss brings that risk straight back. Third, moss degrades. Over time, the moss compacts and degrades. As it breaks down, it holds more moisture, which creates the exact conditions Alocasias are most vulnerable to. And eventually, the plant becomes root-bound inside the glass container, which means a repot. As we've just covered in lesson 3, That means root disturbance, the very thing I've been trying to avoid. The mineral substrate version has been more consistent for me. No algae from the substrate itself, no compaction, no breakdown over time. And honestly, the results speak for themselves. This is my red secret. She's been growing in a Leca and pond combination. Just look at her. That deep copper color, those leaves. This is what an alocasia looks like when the setup is working and you're not constantly intervening to manage the substrate around it. It's not that the moss method is wrong, it's just that it has a higher maintenance profile and a shorter runway before you need to intervene. So, my honest advice is this. If you're willing to manage the algae, replace the moss periodically, and accept that you need to probably repot sooner, it's a valid approach. But if you want something lower maintenance long term, a mineral substrate alongside your leca is the more practical approach. And in my experience, the results are just as good. Now, the next lesson is one I resisted acknowledging the longest, because admitting it meant that some of my losses weren't bad luck and weren't a setup problem. They were a conditions problem. And I kept hoping my setup would compensate for something it was never designed to replace. Some alocasias need controlled conditions. Full stop. These two plants are my variegated Friedek and my flying squid. The Friedek is currently sitting in nutrient solution with an air stone, my absolute go-to rehab setup for plants on the brink of death. And the flying squid is in fluval stratum, another method I use to rehabilitate struggling plants. Both of them ended up here for the exact same reason. I took them out of a controlled environment and expected them to survive in a normal room. My Friedek was spectacular when it was inside my grow tent, genuinely one of the most beautiful plants I've ever grown. But the minute I moved it into the normal conditions of my house, it started to die. The flying squid was a similar story. It was doing well in the grow tent in a wick setup. The moment I moved it out, it collapsed. Here's what I've come to accept after 5 years. Some alocasias genuinely need a grow tent or a plant cabinet with controlled light, temperature, and humidity to survive long term. They need this not because you're doing anything wrong, not because your leca setup is off, but simply because those plants are adapted to conditions that don't naturally exist in most standard homes. I now know that if I want to grow a variegated Friedek or a flying squid, controlled conditions aren't a luxury, they're an absolute necessity. But here's where it gets a bit interesting. My dragon's breath went fully dormant at one point. It came back in the grow tent and is now living in the normal, uncontrolled conditions in my house and doing absolutely fine. Here she is. The same plant that needed the tent to recover is now managing without it. I currently have all of my alocasias outside the grow tent in ambient conditions. Some are thriving, some are struggling. That gap between the ones that adapt and the ones that don't is probably the clearest evidence I have that the species you choose matters as much as the care you give. My honest advice? Know your alocasia species before you commit. If you're somewhere with cold winters and dry indoor air, research whether that alocasia that you want genuinely needs controlled conditions. And if it does, decide whether you're prepared to provide them. There's no shame in choosing species that actually suit your environment instead of fighting your environment all the time. Which brings us to an alocasia species that handles survival completely differently. Remember the mellow I mentioned earlier? Let's talk about why it's one of the alocasia heroes in my home. And stick around because after lesson 7, I've got a bonus lesson that every alocasia grower needs to hear. Germinating corms in leca changed the game for me. More times than not, when I've lost an alocasia, they've been corms, small, firm, round little things sitting in the leca or attached to the base of the root system. So I started putting them directly into moist leca, covering the pots to keep the humidity up and just leaving them alone. They germinated, they grew, and because they'd formed their roots directly in the substrate that live in permanently, there was no transition stress, no leaf loss. The plant just grew from the beginning in its final home. The mellow is the best example of this in my collection. This plant just keeps producing corms. I've lost the mother plant to winter more than once, and she always leaves me corms to fall back on. There's something really satisfying about the plant essentially keeping itself going through its own babies. My absolute go-to for germinating corms is a fluval stratum. The corms love it. It doesn't stick to the delicate new roots, and when the plant is ready to move into leca, the roots come out completely clean, unlike when you're using sphagnum moss. I also do like to germinate my corms directly in leca, but using fluval is my preferred method. So if you think you've lost a plant entirely, don't throw the pot away just yet. Dig through that substrate. There's probably a corm in there waiting for a second chance. Put it in a tiny pot with moist fluval or leca, trap the humidity with a lid and just leave it alone. You'll be shocked at how reliably they resurrect. Before I get to my 7th and final lesson, I want to introduce you to 3 specific plants that have been with me through all of this. Through every freezing Melbourne winter, every bad setup decision, and every period where I nearly gave up on Alocasias altogether. These 3 have outlasted everything, and honestly, they deserve their own moment.
Some plants just survive in spite of you.
Meet my 3 longest surviving Alocasias: the ebony, the poly, and the dragon scale. The ebony has been with me since the inception of this channel. It looked nearly dead in my very first heartbreak Alocasia video. It came back. It nearly died again in 2024, going crispy with what I suspected was mush underneath. I kept it anyway, still in the same submerged setup it's always been in. It doesn't seem to mind it. It's even given me a pup. In summer, it's covered in leaves. Right now, it's closing down for winter, which is why it looks like this. But it's still alive. I genuinely don't fully understand what she wants, but she's staying. The poly. I've honestly never had more than 2 leaves on this plant at any one time. It doesn't die, but it doesn't exactly perform either. It just exists quietly, stubbornly, refusing to leave and refusing to impress. Honestly, it reminds me of my 3rd child. It does exactly what it wants on its own timeline, completely indifferent to my expectations. We've got an understanding, me and this plant. It now has a baby, which I was not expecting. It also loves spider mites, which I was absolutely expecting. It's living in a wavy leaf pot. It's in a submerged setup, and it is completely unbothered as always. And the dragon scale. One of the first plants that made me fall completely in love with Alocasias. It survived every winter, every repot, every period where I honestly forgot to pay proper attention. Still here, still producing those magnificent leaves. It now lives in a just add plants pot in a wick setup, and bam, look at that root system. Kratky, eat your heart out. If you know, you know. How beautiful, just how beautiful is this plant? And what do these 3 have in common? Honestly, I'm not sure. They're not the same species. They're not all in the same setup. They haven't all had the same care. I think some plants are just more forgiving of changing conditions, more willing to go dormant and come back instead of giving up and dying. And after 5 years, I've learned to value that quality in a plant as much as I value a beautiful leaf or an impressive root system. The plants I'm most grateful for aren't always the most spectacular ones. They're the ones that stayed. And maybe there's something in the fact that all 3 of these long-stay plants are larger, more substantial plants, rather than the smaller jewel varieties like the black velvets or the mellows. The poly's leaves aren't particularly hard or thick, but she's still here. The ebony leaves are also on the thinner side, so maybe it's not so much about leaf texture and more about the overall size and robustness of the plant. The bigger Alocasia varieties just seem to have more reserves to draw on when conditions get tough. I don't know for sure, I'm just speculating at this point. But it does make me wonder if we should all be starting our Alocasia collections with the bigger varieties like the polys, ebonies, regal shields, and so on, and work our way down to the more sensitive jewel types rather than the other way around. Let me know what you think in the comments. Alocasias and spider mites. I couldn't finish a 5-year alocasia video without talking about spider mites, because if there's one pest that alocasia growers need to know about and stay on top of, it's this one. Spider mites love alocasias, or is it alocasias love spider mites? They love each other. They thrive in warm, dry conditions, which is exactly what most of our homes become in winter. They're tiny. They hide under the leaves, and by the time you see the webbing, it's already a significant infestation. A single female can lay up to 20 eggs a day, and those eggs hatch in 3 days. So what looks like a minor problem on Monday can be a full-blown infestation by the weekend. I haven't lost specific alocasias to spider mites, I don't think. And I think that's because I never let it get that far. I've lost other plants to spider mites, however. My approach to spider mites is preventative rather than reactive. I wipe down the leaves regularly, I remove dust, and I check the undersides every time I water the plants, or at least I try to anyway. Dust and dry conditions are what spider mites love the most, so keeping the leaves clean is really your first line of defense. When I do need to treat because spider mites are rampant, I use a 2-product system. I start off with a green cleaner plant wash on day 1. Green cleaner breaks down the spider mites' protective layer and suffocates them on contact, killing both the adults and the eggs. Because I grow in semi-hydro, I can go one step further and drench the roots and the leca as well, flushing out any spider mites that might be hiding in the root zone. On day 2, I follow that up with Pure Crop 1, which is a contact spray and a systemic treatment. It absorbs into the plant and makes it harder for any surviving spider mites to feed or reproduce. It also helps the plant to recover, and it does support new growth. I repeat this cycle and rotate products over time to prevent resistance buildup. So Green Cleaner and Pure Crop 1 are not the only products I use. So again, clean your leaves, check your plants regularly, and act fast when you see the first signs of spider mites. That is the whole strategy. Right, let's get back to these 3. The Frydek, the flying squid in there, and the nebula. They're still in rehab as I'm filming this. The airstone is going to continue to oxygenate the nutrient solution. I've stripped off the leaves that weren't going to make it, although I probably still need to take some of those off. And I'm going to do the thing that 5 years of growing alocasias has taught me is often the most important intervention of all. I'm leaving them alone. I really don't know yet if they're gonna make it, but I'll do a full update video once I know how this ends. So hit subscribe if you want to see if they make it. A lot of people compliment me on my semi-hydro or my growing t-shirts. This one says semi-hydro fully obsessed, and they ask me where they can purchase one. Well, you can purchase one at my website, thelecaqueen.com, in the store, or I've got the links in the description of this video. If you're managing a dormant or dying alocasia collection through a tough winter right now, I hope something in this video has helped you. Leave me a comment and tell me which of these lessons hit the closest to home for you. And if you want to go even deeper on plant care generally, I wrote a book called Plant Parenting for Busy People. It covers everything from choosing the right plants for your lifestyle to keeping them alive through the hard seasons. Link is in the description. Also, if you want to keep talking alocasias with people who are growing in semi-hydro specifically, come and join my free Facebook group, Semi-Hydro with the Leca Queen. It's a great community and alocasias come up a lot. But if you're brand new to semi-hydro altogether, watch this next video right here to learn exactly what you need to know to get started. I'll see you there.